What is up, everybody? I'm No Lux Given, and this is everything you missed from episode 2 of the Gambit game, a breakdown in real time. And now I'm going to do a breakdown in real time. I'm going to slowly go through the episode and talk about everything that maybe didn't quite make the cut in the episode. But if you have not yet watched the second episode of Gambit Game, you can find a link for that in the video description below. Make sure you watch that first because obviously this video is going to spoil it. To kick things off, this is a total 180 from the first episode of Gambit Game. I mentioned in my first recap that I was basically added to the Gambit game maybe 30 minutes before filming started for episode 1. And then I was the last player added to the lobby, and I think that kind of made me feel a little bit out of place, a little bit on edge, and also I was just nervous. And I will definitely say I was still nervous going into this episode. I was nervous for every single Gambit game filming, but I'm a lot more comfortable here in the position of being the first person to enter. I get a chance to talk to both Shub and Alex to see if we're all kind of on the same page going into this week. And then I also kind of get to control the flow of discussion. As new players enter the room, I'm the first person to chat with them. Shub plays this very cool in this discussion, saying that Joey is a great distraction, and definitely lets me know that Shub is someone that's viewing this game at a very similar way than I am. And then I kind of say, okay, well, here is our other villain of the episode, and potentially another distraction for everyone else. We have Ben, who definitely stirred the pot a lot in that first episode. And one thing that I'm bringing up with both Ben and then again when Spicy enters the room, Alex, Shub, and I, at least from my perspective, here's what I'll say of episode 1, and I do voice this in the episode as well, but I knew that obviously myself, Alex, Shub, and Grunkle all scored 2, and then Joey scored 60. But the rest of the main match was all kind of a blur to me. I had no clue who scored what, if Spicy got 17, if Spicy got 13, because it didn't really matter. I just knew it was between 18 and 2, where all of us placed. So that was kind of what I was trying to refresh my memory of in my conversation with Ben, and Ben kind of has a weird perspective that he voices multiple times, that Spicy screwed Ben because Spicy scored more points. Spicy just outplayed Ben. He didn't screw Ben at all. Spicy just was able to trade or play cards against everyone. In fact, Ben screwed Spicy, and I don't know if that is Ben trying to just throw some heat onto Spicy, or if he legitimately, as the episode presents it, feels betrayed because Spicy outplayed him. Speaking of Spicy, he enters next and is the first to notice potentially what the game is. We have 4 different locations. Well, we always have 4 different rooms that we can chat in, though this time they have different names. They're not called the pool hall, the arcade, the warehouse, and whatever. They're called the Tiny Nation, Small Nation, Big Nation, and Huge Nation, and those names will have an impact on the actual game this time around. One thing that is like kind of subtle, it's just kind of me stroking Spicy's ego a little bit while also attempting to appear as friendly as possible. When Leanne enters the room, I bring up the nations so that way Leanne is in on that fact as well, but I very deliberately point out that Spicy was the one that initially noticed it. The other thing that this does is it makes it seem like, okay, I'm not the one going around noticing things, and give Spicy some credit to also potentially make him out as more of a threat, as well as just give him the credit and stroke his ego there. Before we get into the trial for this episode, I want to also talk about the aftermath of the first episode. And I talk a little bit about this in my exit interview with Grunkle, which probably came out yesterday. But if you have not seen that already, basically, we didn't really know whether or not Joey randomized his selection for who was going to the duel. I thought that maybe Joey just decided to pick Grunkle, either identifying him as a threat or because he left the room and then wasn't seen as loyal. I didn't know that it was just random between myself and Grunkle, and that Alex, Shub, and Joey had a plan before Grunkle and I joined the room. Now, Shub and Alex could have potentially leaked that to me to curry some favor when I was with them at the start of the game here, though I understand why they don't. I think they don't want to implicate themselves in that, and they also might not have been sure of exactly how much that played into, though I'm sure some DMs and things were exchanged in between the games. We don't really DM each other that much, direct message, not deathmatch. We don't really direct message each other that much between the games, but when we do, I'll let you know for any relevant things that come up. But the other thing that kind of rubbed me the wrong way is the fact that Joey currently has 6 light spheres, 6 Grunkles. It was never explicitly stated that we were going to split up the Grunkles, and I think that if we had said that on the onset, that after the match, Joey's going to win 6, he could give each of us 1, and then all of us will end the game with 2, which at least makes it a little bit more fair. It's not really fair that Joey wins the game and then also gets all of the light spheres to show for it. So I think that that was something that we could have communicated better, but I did bring this up to Joey in between the 2 games, and I was like, hey, are you going to spread around those light spheres, spread the love? And I think after seeing in this game that you can actually use the light spheres to influence the games, which maybe he didn't know, maybe he did. I'm not sure how familiar any of the other competitors are with the Genius going into this. Joey decided to hang on to all of the light spheres. And this was, I think, a miscalculation from Joey, a little bit of a bad social play, because this really started to create a little bit of a rift between him and myself, which maybe he didn't care about. Maybe he's fine with a rift, he's fine with people being mad at him, because he thinks that even if someone is mad at him, they're going to work with him if they have to. But I think that if you want someone to work with you in the future, you have to make good on your previous deal. So I was a little bit hesitant about the idea of working with Joey going forward, because of the fact that he held out on these Grunkles here. But then on to the game, we can talk about this a little bit. I do voice in the episode pretty quickly when I'm in a room alone with Zach after Shub's done explaining the game. This is a game for 2 people, at least it was in the Genius. And if you haven't already seen how this game plays out in the Genius, I won't spoil everything, but I am going to talk about some more optimal strategies in, I'll talk about those now as well. I want to bring up just my experience with the Genius, I guess. So I had played in the Gambit game a good deal of time after initially watching the Genius. I think I watched the Genius probably in the summer of 2020, had a lot of downtime, and then the Gambit game started early into 2021. And I only watched it once. I watched it very quickly. I watched about an episode every 3 days or so, just because I would break the episodes up. They're long episodes. And I bring this up to say, I was familiar with the Genius. I had seen it all, but I didn't remember all of the games 100% and commit them all to memory. There was part of me that after this game was kind of repeated and red, blue, gold game was kind of like the 1, 2, 3 game from the Genius, part of me wanted to go back and watch the Genius, but I knew the games would also be different enough that it wouldn't be super important to know the exact strategies that were used, because I say that this is a game for 2 people to win, and that's how it worked in the Genius. But in the Genius, there must have only been 2 different nations, as they're referred to here, whereas here there are 4 nations, and so by extension that would make this a 4-person game. However, it's not quite a 4-person game, and I'll break that down in a second as well. This is actually a 3-person game. And I'll just say what I think there's a strategy that just wins this game every time, And it's kind of curious because if multiple people had used this strategy, you are in kind of a sticky situation. But what you should do is come up with a group of 3. And let's say that it's myself. Well, let's not name the players. Let's just say it is a group of 3. One of you goes to the huge nation, one of you goes to the big nation, and one of you goes to the small nation. Then all 3 of you play your shrinks on the tiny nation, the smallest one. The point here is to take the tiny nation out of play. You just want to make it a non-factor. And by all 3 of you shrinking there, it means that it is very, very difficult for anyone to earn anything at that location. Now, for the first round, it is still possible that people will be able to earn something in the tiny nation. Potentially, one person will be able to earn 2,000 in the tiny nation at the start of the game. But other than that, I think that's right? Yeah, because it'll be taxed 3 times. So the most somebody can earn there is 2,000, but if 2 people show up, then the most either of them can earn is 1,000. Then what you do in all 3 of you, in the big nation, huge nation, and small nation, each of you bid 1,000 for the entire game. And in doing so, no one else will be able to score more than 1,000 throughout the entirety of the match. And what you probably want to do is during the first round, say that you are going to bid 5,000 with everyone else, and then just immediately bid 1,000. Don't even entertain the idea of splitting with anybody. The point is to make it so that everyone's scores are low, and then if either one of you are able to deceive people, then you will wind up scoring the most points. And then to further this deception, you could additionally play secrets to start the game off, and then you can also further this deception by rotating the different rotations that you go to. So the person that went to huge goes to big, the person that goes to big goes to small, and then small goes to huge. And then doing so kind of obfuscates the fact that you guys are working together as a trio and who is actually making the deception happen. So I think that could have been another way to play this game, and definitely would have canceled out really any hope that anyone else had of winning. Like I said, the only trick to this is that somebody can score 2,000 in the tiny nation. But other than that fact, you should wind up with the leading scorer on your team, and even if one of your other teammates ties for last, you will get 3 spheres of immortality, tokens of life. I forget what all the naming conventions are in this, but you will get 3 immunities, and you'll be able to make all 3 of you safe, and I think that's the best strategy. Now, having said all of that, these games are very quick. I brought this up multiple times in my breakdown last week. I think that this is very, very tough to come up with this strategy in the limited time because it is a brand new game, and then also find 2 other people that are going to act out on this strategy with you. I probably could have gone to Ben and Joey and said, are you guys willing to do this strategy? And they definitely would have been. The other thing that you have to think about, and it is a huge part of this video, I think the theme of this video will be, do you want to win? And that is something that very much played as a factor throughout this entire trial. But we're not there just yet. We're gonna back it up to the first round of this game, and I was a little bit surprised, I think, to get Huge Nation with just Zach and myself. This is the biggest location, and only Zach and myself went there. And part of that, it's a little bit psych here too. It's not just all luck, it's trying to get a feel of the other players, and from there, determining where you think they might go. We all knew that Joey, Spicy, and Kathy were taking up the small nation, and that was a good play by Joey as well, just to say we should do small so that way, no one else will be tempted to go there. It does kind of complicate some things because it lets players know where they have to shrink if they want to mess with Joey, and Kathy and Spicy. But other than that, I think that it is a pretty good plan to just let players know where you're going. And I'm pretty sure I did that too. I'm pretty sure I made it known that I was going to the Huge Nation, and thus potentially scared some other players away from going there. You're going to see a lot more of that happen in the second round, but there was a lot of chaos. Not only do you have to try to figure out your strategies, but you also have to figure out where you're going, and that just made this first round really complicated, and I think a lot of players were unsure about exactly what they were doing, and Zach and I were the benefactors of that, getting to solo take up in the Huge Nation. One other thing that I want to draw some attention to in this video that is everything you didn't see in the episode is the shrinks, which are mentioned in the episode, but it's never mentioned who actually plays the shrinks. So in this video, I'm also going to be discussing that, which is info that I have now from the producers of the Gambit game, but isn't something that any of us knew at the time. This wasn't revealed in the game. So for the very first time, let's talk about these shrinks. The first two shrinks are used in this first round. We see that Zach shrinks the Tiny Nation, which definitely, it's good to basically just takes the Tiny Nation out of play. Zach wasn't going there. Zach never goes to the Tiny Nation, so it is a pretty good shrink on his part. But this shrink in the Small Nation is one that I am very, very curious about. I thought that potentially maybe it could have been Ben, because like I said, everyone knew that Spicy and Joey were going to the Small Nation. I thought that maybe it was even myself watching the episode back, knowing that I was feeling some type of way about Joey. And I know that I definitely considered using my shrink on the Small Nation, but turns out the person that shrinked the Small Nation was Spicy. So I'm very, very curious to hear from Spicy. So I'll bring this up whenever I have a discussion with Spicy later on in the season. I know Spicy watched my last video like this, so you could also feel free to say it down in the comments below, but feel like it is potentially a much more nuanced decision than that. Very interesting for Spicy to shrink on the Small Nation there, which then gives him a tax of 2 alongside Joey and Kathy here in the Small Nation. And then, of course, in this first round, we have Ben play a secret. And I want to make this perfectly clear. I knew that Ben had played the secret the entire time. You're gonna hear me say a lot of different things throughout the course of this episode, but I think that it is very, very important to understand, to also understand my actions that I'm going to take throughout the rest of this game. Without a shadow of a doubt, I know that Ben played the secret. What's unfortunate here for Ben is I think that they really just have such a misunderstanding of the idea of building trust, and that other players might want to make moves to build trust, that they don't think that anyone else is going to be honest either. And they could have gotten away with a cool 16,000 here, which is what I thought for sure had happened, and instead they walk away with only 8. So let's talk about Ben. There's a lot going on socially with Ben, and honestly, my entire game plan for this episode really just revolves around the social perception of Ben. We can see that Spicy from the rip is very determined to make Ben lose, and I'm not as determined to eliminate. It really seemed like Spicy wanted to eliminate Ben, as we are given in the episode, and that's something that I'll have to be curious about. But I think where my head is at is pretty similar to Alex's and potentially Shoob's. And I think that we're all kind of in alignment there. Ben is a great distraction. Ben is a great target. that someone will duel instead of dueling me, and that's all that I need him to be. I don't really care if he loses, I just don't want him to win, because by him winning, then that means potentially someone will duel me. So that's kind of my thought process, just kind of going into the episode. And then Spicy is very strongly leading the anti-Ben charge. I am more about spreading doubt in people's minds, as you'll see in just a second, and making sure that the other players all trust me more than they trust anyone else. I would say if you boil my game down to anything, it's that. No Lux Given is the most trustworthy player. Don't trust any of those other scrubs. And the discussion about who actually played the secret is very much the same thing of just trying to make other players less likely to trust each other. I say Ben is talking to Joey right now. Maybe Joey played the secret. And in no universe do I think Joey actually played the secret on Ben's behalf, but just the idea that that is possible is something that I want to get festering in people's minds, planting those seeds to just make people maybe a little bit less likely to trust Joey as well. All I'm trying to do is paint Ben as untrustworthy. And Spicy kind of is doing this too, but also trying to make him lose at the same time. But when Spicy suggests the idea that if you are in a room with Ben, I definitely take that baton and run with it, though unfortunately just Devin doesn't see that I am running with it here. And we bring up the plan. Shub says, okay, if you were in a room with Ben, you bid 1, and that's what you got to do. I think everybody was pretty on board with this plan. And what is interesting about this plan is it actually is very reminiscent of the plan that happens in The Genius. If I remember correctly, again, my memory is a little bit hazy at this point. It was 3 years ago that I had watched it, but basically the idea is to, and with the strategy that I had proposed as well, you can kind of use Ben as part of your alliance without Ben realizing he is part of your alliance, and then you get the best of both worlds, because Ben is kind of forced to cooperate with you, but he's just forced to do it because he'll have to bid 1 because other people in his room are bidding 1, and then that allows you to potentially score more points by underbidding in the other room and then just controlling more rooms at the same time. So that was definitely the main thing that was on my mind, is kind of controlling Ben's ability to win and not allowing him to win, so that way he would be a candidate for second duelist. Next, we hear Alex vocalize basically this same kind of concept to Ben, that, hey, I want to keep you in the game, you're a great shield for me, so I want to keep you here, I have no problems with you, you haven't screwed me. But Ben is a little bit chaotic, and part of the problem is that when you have Ben really close to you and you are using him as a shield, well, then he's close enough that he can stab you himself, even if he is protecting you from the other players. So this was kind of an interesting social move, I think, from Ben, and I wasn't blind to it. I think that that's also important to note. We knew that Alex was trying to talk to and work things out with Ben. I think that that was even vocalized by Zach in that past room, but even Alex, in attempting to work with Ben, was still getting sabotaged by him. The next thing I want to point out in the episode is actually right here, and this might not seem like an extremely important screen, but it is actually extremely important to my game. So one thing to note here, when you see players and you just have a letter, it's just kind of like an artifact of the recording software that was used. Joey's actually in this room, he's not in here with us, but you'll notice something really important right now. We've got a room of 3 being controlled by Joey, and Spicy's there too. We've got another room with Chaos from Ben, And then we've got a room with myself and 4 other players, and this is exactly where I want to be. It's where I wish I could have been in the previous match, but with Spicy now working with Joey, I have found myself in a perfect position to kind of lead the majority of players. And you don't actually see it in the episode, it gets cut, but I am telling all of these players where to go for the second round. And not only that, I am, using the information that I'm getting from other players to make sure that this configuration is the best for me, while also being appealing to what the other players are doing. Now, I didn't know exactly 100% what moves everyone would make, but the point here is that I am very much a shot caller in this second round and kind of corralling all of these other people, which is something that is very easy to overlook, and it's not super relevant to the strategy, and also it's hard to edit down because it's a little bit, I want to say, like, ethereal in a way that, I'm blocking Spicy here. Sorry, Spicy. Now I'm blocking Shub. What can you do? It is very much, it's hard to just justify in a scene because a lot of this is still psych as well. Just because you tell someone to go to a room doesn't mean they're going to go there. Just because you tell somebody that you're going to a room doesn't mean they're not going to go there. It's all about how you communicate it, and I think that I was able to do that really well, especially in this second round. I would say the first round definitely had a little bit of luck in it. There was a little bit of chaos, but this second round, I put all on me, on my ability to find a room just with myself and Zach. And part of that is this kind of sequence right here where I'm with Devin, Shub, Leanne, and Zach, and we're kind of discussing what rooms people might go to. And then later on, Zach and I solidify that, and then we split up to go tell the group of Joey, Kathy, and Spicy where we're going, and Alex and Ben, because they are not currently in this conversation. And in conjunction with both of those things, we were able to once again be the only 2 players in a room to ourselves. So like I said, round 2 was a pretty good round for me, both in my ability to distribute the players and wind up in a room with just myself and Zach, which is obviously really good. But the other thing that was really, really important that I was actually looking forward to the most with this game is the ability to get one-on-one time with players in the game and have discussions that I wasn't able to have in the first episode where I was just sequestered off with Joey. So Zach and I have now been able to talk for round 1 and round 2, really pick each other's brains and understand where we're at going forward. Now, I hear Zach vocalize in the episode that getting close with people means that you're hoping that they won't pick you in the future. That's kind of Zach's game plan. That's not really where I'm at. I think that that's definitely a strategy that can be used in Gambit game, but it's a little bit tricky because if people know that you are just trying to get close to them so that way you aren't a potential duelist, I'll just say that for me, I'm not just trying to get close to people so that I don't get dueled by them. I'm trying to get close to people so that I can potentially work with them, and was kind of just trying to suss Zach out. I do think that we did have some nice trust with each other because obviously we both played 5,000 in both of those rounds, and we were then able to trust each other going forward. But Zach really had no intention of winning, and that was basically what I figured out in the second round. I was willing. I said, Zach, I'm submitting 5,000. You are more than welcome to submit 4,000 if you'd like to, or I'll submit 4,000. You can submit 5,000. Do you want to try to play for the win? And just to give you some insight here into exactly where Zach was at, not really interested. Zach is much more keen on trying to float by for as long as possible and never being a potential duelist pick. So, it's good to know that, to be able to know how other players are going to want to play the game, because it informs how you need to make plays around them. So it is still good information to get from him here, but this was basically where we had kind of decided more or less that we weren't going to go for the win. And I was fine with that too. As I said, the theme of this is that there is a cost of winning, especially in a game like this. A game like this, in order to win, you have to screw people over, more or less. I mean, I actually almost won without screwing anyone over, but for the most part, in order to win, you have to, at least underbid somebody at some point during the game. And in doing so, you're creating enemies. And I wasn't trying to create enemies, I wanted to create allies. That was my focus. Let's talk about the shrinks. For the second round, we see a shrink on the huge nation. This was used by Kathy. Not relevant this round, potentially could be relevant in the future, as Kathy is just going to stick to the small nation. But the small nation also gets a shrink, this one from Shub. And you do have to think, Shub was Joey's main person in episode 1, and then come episode 2, they just really don't have any type of communication. Shub and I are both playing this game pretty similarly in now wanting to be with the rest of the people and not be just necessarily tied to Joey as much as they were in episode 1. And now Joey also kind of doesn't have any alliance, as it seems, with Shub. They're just kind of both off doing their own separate things, and I think Shub maybe feels some type of way about being left out of Joey's plans. Though I don't know if Shub necessarily wanted to be involved, you at least want to be asked. In the second round, Shub bids 1, and in doing so continues to screw over Devin. And while this is unfortunate, what's really funny about this is this was kind of looked at as Ben screwing over Devin again, which is really well played by Shub, and I kind of co-signed this with Shub that it was Devin's fault for not bidding 1 while being in a room with Ben, and that's just what you gotta do. And in nailing home the fact that this is Devin's fault, because when you're in a room with Ben, you should be bidding 1, we just further cement that idea that going forward, if you're in a room with Ben, you gotta bid 1 and just kind of help keep everyone else's scores low, as long as you are not in a room with Ben yourself. Here's where things get really, really awkward for me though, as I choose to go to the tiny nation, which gets shrunk again. And that is really bad, but also 2 other players show up there with me. And I guess potentially I didn't communicate well enough that I wanted to go to the tiny nation, but honestly, I think that this is pretty great for me here. I think that I played this round really, really well, and I'm also not in a room with Ben, which allows me to form more connections with other players in the cast, which is important. Zach and I did deliberately split up this round because we both wanted to be able to form relationships with other players. We were both pretty keen on that at this point in the game, and I was able to do that, I think, with Devin and Leanne here, while also being a little bit coy about it. Basically, what I say, and this gets trimmed down in the episode a little bit, but I have enough points at this point in the game. So if Devin wants to score a bunch of points, I say again, I'm gonna bid 5. Devin, if you wanna bid 4,000, kind of get out of your hole a little bit, I can take it. I can afford to gift some points. The only thing that I ask is that if you are going to take points from me, say that vocally now. And in doing so, then Leanne can also bid 4,000 with you. And I thought this was a really, really coy way to do it, because it allows myself to be kind of like a sacrificial helper to both of these other players who might not have scored that many points as much as me before this point. So I'm saying, okay, I'm willing to sacrifice in order to just gain trust with you, which isn't something that you can quantify as easy as you can quantify your points or as you can quantify your light spheres, but I think it is the most important resource in the game. And by not going for the win, I am instead attempting to build up as many trust points as I possibly can. So I say, Devin, you can score more than me this round if you need to, because I know you're hurting. And this would potentially save Devin from the deathmatch and potentially even put myself in a little bit of jeopardy. So it's a little bit tricky, but it was an empty offer at the same time. It was an offer that I didn't think that Devin was going to take, and if he does take it, the offer is, you can bid 4,000. Just let Leanne know, and she will also be able to bid 4,000 with you, at which point I also would have bid 4,000, because I don't want to put myself in last place. We're getting taxed pretty heavily this round for being in the tiny nation, which was shrunk and which is way over maximum capacity here. So we all only wind up scoring 1,000 this round, so the tax was 4,000 here, and that would have put me down to 6,000 if I had just decided to score nothing, or I could have stayed at 10,000 if we all bid 4. So in doing so, I was kind of putting out a lot of feelers. I was sacrificing myself for potential allies. I was also kind of getting a read of how these players might approach the game, while also leaving myself some wiggle room if I wanted to back out of my proposed plan. So I would have just said, Devin, go for 4,000. He would have said, okay. Leanne also bids 4,000, and then I can bid 4,000 along with them if I don't want to come in last place myself. And I thought that that was a really smart way to play it. As for the shrinks this round, Joey shrinks the huge nation down to 2, so those guys get taxed a little bit, and then Alex actually additionally shrunk the tiny nation, so he was the reason that we all lost 1,000 there. Unfortunately, Zach gets got here and doesn't bid 1,000 in the room with Ben, and this is a really tricky thing to do, because you want to kind of propose this plan that if anyone is in the room with Ben, they will win, or they will only bid 1,000 and just kind of minimize the room and a race to the bottom, as Ben put it earlier on. The problem with this in execution is that you never personally want to be the one to do it, because if you are the one that does this, then that means that you are the one potentially ticking Ben off. So that kind of gets a little bit tricky, and that's why it's really hard to make somebody lose in the Gambit game, because by making somebody lose, you have to make a move that can potentially alienate that player, and that means you're going to the duel right alongside them. So that's a really tricky thing, and that is why I think potentially we see Zach more willing to be taken advantage of than being seen as making a move against someone else. In a very similar thing to not wanting to win, which Zach vocalized in the previous round. Zach just wants to not tick anybody off and skate by for as long as he can. And then finally, I start to talk with Ben, and I really liked how Ben voiced in his confessionals his opinion of this discussion, because it meant that I was coming off as genuine and someone that would potentially want to work with Ben. However, there's a risk with that, because that's what Alex did as well. And we saw that when people extend that olive branch to Ben, he's willing to just snap it in half and have 2 branches for himself. So, my goal with this conversation is to extend that branch to Ben, but in a way that I'm testing Ben's loyalty. And I ask him a very simple question. What did you submit in round 1, and was it you that played the secret? A very obvious question that there is a very, very obvious answer to. And also gives Ben a reasonable chance to continue to lie to me. It may or might not have gotten back to Ben at this point that I was saying it could be Joey that told or that played the secret on Ben. I was the one at least throwing some doubt on Joey earlier, though I never believed it. I always knew without a shadow of a doubt. You can even see Ben can't keep his smile down when the discussion of this secret comes up, and he tries to have a good poker face, but I guess that's part of the problem with having a poker face, is that then people can't believe you when you're telling the truth either, which is going to come up in just a moment. But the issue becomes Ben continues to lie. That's basically what happens next. I say, Ben, I'm willing to work with you. Did you play the secret? And he says, no. And what he's really saying there is, no, I am not willing to tell you the truth. And that's not somebody that I can work with. And this decision right here is what ultimately decides that if I am ever going to, I'm just not going to have an opportunity to work with Ben. And in round 4, Devin uses his shrink on the huge nation, I used my shrink on the big nation, and Ben uses his on the small nation. The only player that does not use a shrink is Leanne. So fast forward to the final moments of the 4th round, and we've got some tough discussions. You can see neither of these players look particularly happy, and that's because they had a discussion without Zach. Zach is now not in this room with us. So again, I talk with Ben and I ask him straight up, how many points have you scored? Did you play the secret? What's going on? No straight answers. And part of the issue with this is Ben made a blunder. He knew it would be a race to the bottom, and he took a head start right at the start of this game. Instead of bidding 4,000 in that first round when he played the secret, he only bids 2,000. He could have had 16,000 more than anybody else in the game, but instead he only had 8. If Ben was able to be honest with me and properly communicate that to me, then I could have maybe understood a little bit more about where he was coming from. But because of his inability to be honest, I couldn't understand his idea here that he would push me as the winner. Clearly, he would push himself, and he had had a bunch of one-on-one conversations with Joey, so I thought he was going for a win where he would then give Joey immunity. And despite him presenting a really good offer, I think what I interpreted from Ben here, just to make it make complete sense, because some people might have watched this and said, Ben's presenting a really good offer, why would you shoot this down? Well, here's the alternative plan. Ben knows that I'm just a little bit sharper potentially than some of the other people that he's screwed over in the past, and that maybe I see him for a little bit more. So if Ben just says to me, let's bid 5,000, there is no way that offer ever gets entertained, because there's no way that it's the truth, right? But what if Ben proposes that I go 4,000 and he goes 5,000? Well, that might just be a little bit more believable because it's a little bit more enticing for me. So it kind of sets the bait. My belief was that Ben was telling me to go 4,000 so that he could go 3,000, win the match, and just dupe one more person. That is honestly what I believed, and every part of this conversation made me believe that because Ben would not tell the dang truth. Hopefully we'll get to talk with Ben soon and get to the bottom of this, and I can kind of explain the downside of lying in a situation where you're trying to get somebody to work with you, because it makes no dang sense. But unfortunately, this is where we found ourselves, and I decided to bid 1,000. I vocalize that I am bidding 1,000 because not that I think that Ben is going to the duel, but I still want to have a semblance of a working relationship with him. And I felt like by at least explaining to him that I'm going 1,000, I am keeping somewhat of a relationship there. And in hindsight, I'm actually really glad that I did, because if I had told Ben that I was going through with this plan and then just bid 1,000 and kind of just duped him, then he actually would have lost, because if Ben didn't have this extra 1,000, then he would have been the lowest scoring player in the game. And that was also part of the unbelievable part of the story, because either Ben is way ahead and wants to just cement his victory against Kathy or Spicy, which we knew were working together as well. Or maybe something messed up and he wasn't able to score in the other rounds because Shub went 1, and then maybe Alex went 1 and Ben didn't, and both of those things kept his score low. I didn't want to be someone that was the very last person in the game to screw Ben over, so I was pretty vocal about the fact that I was going for 1,000, and I asked this to Ben. If you wanted to push me as a winner, why not just submit 5,000 regardless? Why not just start the round by saying, look, I'm submitting 5,000, you can submit whatever you want? That really puts the ball in my court, because it's not like if I just submit 4,000, I would have won. If I would have submit 4,000, then Ben would have scored 2,000. Now, that's because of what I said in the room, but Ben could have still gone through with his half of the deal, though that would have locked him out of the game. So it wouldn't have been super great to do, but you get the point that I'm bringing up here. I wanted to, in scoring 1,000, still stay true, because here's the other thing you gotta realize. I actually thought I came up with the idea that anybody that's in a room with Ben should submit 1,000. And in the episode, we see that Spicy comes up with the idea maybe there was a sort of I don't want to say like hive mind, but like collective, everybody kind of had very similar ideas at the start of this. And regardless, I was probably the loudest person beating the drum that if you are in a room with Ben, submit 1,000. And we can't trust Ben, we can't score against him. How does it then look if I win the game and then give Ben one of my marks of victory? It then associates me with Ben, which makes me kind of untrustworthy, but also makes me untrustworthy because then was this drum that I was beating actually a distraction so that I could win? And it kind of ruins a little bit of my credibility. And that, I think, is the other cost of winning. Obviously, in this game, in order to score points, you kind of have to score points at the expense of other people. Though, as we saw in this final round, sometimes people are willing to let you score more points against them. And we saw that myself and Kathy, the two people both in contention for actually winning this game, never had to lie to anyone. So that kind of begs the question, is this a game where you have to win at the expense of others? And I would say that still yes, in my own case, and in Kathy's case as well. She wasn't able to build connections with any of the other players other than Spicy. Spicy just had her sequestered off the whole time. She played one round or two with Joey, and then one round with Shub as well. But otherwise, there was certainly a little bit of a cost to going for the win, and I think that's especially important when you talk about Spicy, who in that first trial was in my position, was always in the room with the most amount of other players and controlling all of the flows of conversation, enough to the point where in his group, in that Arcade 6 or whatever it was, Spicy scored the most points, 17 out of all of the other players that weren't Joey. This round, what Spicy sacrificed by going for the win was his control over the rest of the cast, and in doing so allowed me to form really good relationships with both Zach, Leanne, and Devin in a way that I might not have been able to do otherwise. So that is potentially the cost of winning, and here the cost of me winning with Ben would have then been me alienating Shub, who went along with the Bid 1000 plan, as well as Devin and Leanne, I think, as well. I don't think Joey, Kathy, Spicy would have cared. Spicy actually probably would have felt some type of way and then probably would have started to associate both myself and Ben, which is a definite risk, and one that I really had no interest in. So instead, I decide to not go for the win. Now, I do really help Ben out here. That should be noted. The fact that I allow Ben to score 1,000 in the final round means that he is not the loser along with Devin. And I do kind of hurt myself, unfortunately, because I could have hit 10,000, which is a threshold to earn a second light sphere, but instead I'm only going to be getting one from this trial instead of winning, and we see Kathy is able to earn 3 light spheres. So that would have been nice, but unfortunately I thought it was better to just build relationships. I do think it's really funny how Devin immediately selects Ben, and I think that's a lot of the work that Spicy and I both put in before that, as well as a lot of the work that Ben put in to ensure that he would be second duelist when he doesn't win. I will say, just for context, this was a really, really cool duel. That's my puppy snoring. This will be out there forever for the whole world to see, as Devin, or Demetrius, so lovingly tells Ben. And I think that a lot of this was cut down. It's a little bit funny, it's a little bit entertaining. It was also a little bit much. It felt a little bit uncomfortable with Devin kind of playing this character. Now, whatever you have to do, Devin does vocalize at the end that he feels the fact that he played this character helped him get in the mindset of, one, somebody that had to eliminate another player from the game, which is a tough thing to do, even if it is at the expense of your own win. That's the cost of winning. Somebody else has got to go. And it's also helpful to kind of, get in the zone and be able to concentrate on the game and psych out your opponent. Ultimately, I felt like it was a little bit much, and something that I'm very much against is being a sore winner. I think it's generally something that you want to try to avoid. Being a sore loser is one thing, but when you win and you're also a jerk about it while you are stopping somebody else from having fun, just kind of a little bit awkward. And it's a sour note to end on here, but it's ultimately going to be a sour note to end most of these videos, as somebody does have to get eliminated, and Ben was a ton of fun. For all of the chaos that he brought, it was a ton of fun to both play with him and watch him play in rewatching these episodes. But unfortunately for Ben, this is the end of his Gambit game journey. I also wanted to take a second at the end of this episode to take a look at the community ratings. I've been posting on Reddit, Discord, Twitter, and here on my YouTube channel a Google form to rank the remaining competitors, and I'm gonna keep through that each week, and then we'll see how players change in the rankings and discuss the rankings at the end of each of these episode recaps. Firstly, we will say goodbye to Ben here. It is worth noting that Ben ranked at the bottom of the community ratings after the first episode, and the community kind of got it right. Ben was basically tied with Leanne, more or less. It was super, super close, but ultimately Ben just had a slightly lower rating and was the person to go home in episode 2. And then right next to Ben, we had Leanne, who did not fare well this episode either. She actually went down as far as the community ratings are concerned. And one thing to note about the ratings, what I am doing here is on the first episode, everyone was ranked 1 through 10. Second episode, everyone's ranked 2 through 10. Third episode, everybody got ranked 3 through 10. So by default, your ratings should rise. However, now there is less competition for the bottom, whereas previously Ben and Leanne might have been splitting that rating somewhat. Now Leanne is getting a lot of these 2s here. In about 30 responses, over a third of the people put Leanne at the bottom, and nobody put her above 8, with not even that many above 5 even. So a lot of responses towards the bottom. In this second episode, we don't really get to see too much from Leanne, and even though we do see her wind up in the tiny location by herself, which, credit to her to have the willingness to even go to the tiny nation, we don't really hear her vocalize it in a way that sounds strategic, and I think that also detracts a little bit from her rating this week. Second up from the bottom, we see a huge fall this week for Devin. And it's kind of interesting to look at this data because Devin did win a duel this week. So you would think that could increase his rating. However, he kind of just accepted a loss in the trial. There are a few different ways that, I even tell him in round 3, you can take some of my points to get out of it. And he's just kind of unwilling to do so and resigns himself to the duel. Now, will Devin continue to just be willing to go to the duel when there isn't Ben there for him to duel against? I'm not sure, but we definitely didn't really see that much of a fight out of Devin for a large portion of the episode until, of course, we get to the duel where Devin really turns it on. And I think that's where potentially we're seeing like some of these 7s come from. But overall, most people are rating him a 4, not too highly. We also see a dip for Zach this week as well. And part of what I was getting at, you can see that Zach goes from a rating of 4.97 to 4.94, though everyone's rating should be increasing over time. So even if your rating is just kind of staying consistent, it actually does mean that it's kind of going down, and we see that here with Zach as 3rd from the bottom now, previously kind of towing the middle of the pack. People are a little bit unsure where to place Zach, if they want to put him at a 3 or a 5, so let's call it a 4, though kind of funny that he's not really getting that 4th position. He's typically either getting below or above Devin, which is solidly in that 4th position, but not too many higher scorings from Zach, but still a few people rating him at a 9. There is a lot of timidness, I think, that gets shown in Zach's play, but there's also a little bit of a willingness to roll over that we've now seen in both of these first 2 episodes. And it's interesting, like, is part of that strategic because he wants to be seen as weak or wants to be seen as someone that will just roll over? Or is he just somebody that doesn't have, what it takes to say no to people, which it could come back to bite him. Next up, we have Alex, who took the biggest drop this episode. Devin was a pretty similar drop, though Alex was just slightly bigger. We see Alex go from the 4th best position to in the bottom 4, being the 4th worst position now. And this wasn't really a great showing for Alex. We do hear him voice a lot of his thoughts, and we can kind of hear where his head is at in the confessional, but in terms of his ability to act on these things, he's still kind of getting rolled over. He is able to get bailed out by having some allies, and that definitely bodes well for him, but not looking super great here overall. we can see that his votes kind of vary across the board, definitely converging on this fourth from the bottom finish in sixth place. This is kind of a confusing way to do it, and I'll reorder all of the votes once all of the data is on the screen. I'll order it by this episode. Right now I have it sorted by the previous episode, but you can still see in the ratings for this episode, he did get some 8s and even a fair share of 7s, though most of his votes were below that, and then no 9s or 10s. So nobody has Alex as the cream of the crop, and most people have him towards the middle, but slightly less so. And then at almost our biggest jump up, though not quite, that's coming, we've got Kathy, who was previously towards the bottom of the pack and now is pretty solidly, as you can see, right in the middle, with almost everybody placing half of the cast above Kathy and half of the cast below her. And she even trends a little bit higher on average than below that. And she's done well so far. She now has a dual win and she has a trial win. And even though she isn't seen as contributing that much to the trial win, she does contribute a lot in that she is malleable and able to work with people, and people can trust her to execute a plan. And that is definitely an important skill to have in the Gambit game, and Kathy is being rewarded here accordingly. But the biggest bump up this episode is going to be from yours truly, and we can see my ratings here. I'm pretty solid across the board with some high polls here in the middle at 7 and 8 points. No votes for 2, so nobody thinks that I am the worst player in the cast, and a few players thinking I'm potentially better, but much more of a middling score. And honestly, I think, you know, these ratings I think are based on people's potential to do well in the various games as much as it is on performance. Because if you actually just look at the episode, I had a chance to win and I just squandered it, which was certainly a little bit heartbreaking to watch. But I think that some people especially, recognized that I maybe didn't even want to win, and therefore it wasn't great. It was good gameplay for me to intentionally not win there and just kind of stay in the middle of the pack and stay observant. So I think that people are starting to recognize some of my gameplay a little bit here, though I do think I deserved my 4.26 for that first episode because I was very, very close to going home, and it could have just as easily been me. Next up, we've got a pretty big drop down for Shub, whose graph looks pretty similar to mine. It's very much middling and then topping out with the 6s and 7s, though still some 9s. I don't think that this episode was a great performance for Shub. They don't do anything particularly impressive, and for the most part are not really contributing to the game at all. But the one thing that Shub does is manages, I believe, to play 5,000 every time except for that one time where they're in the room with Ben. And there's a few really interesting things that happen as far as Shub's game is concerned. In the second round, I brought this up earlier, the fact that they are able to get away with a bid of 1,000 that I almost even forgot for a second, because all of the heat for that is then able to get shifted elsewhere. And Shub is really part of the reason ultimately that Devin goes to the duel, but it's never a consideration for Devin to duel Shub, and I think that's very important. Shub then also helps to contribute to the winner, maintaining a positive relationship with both Kathy and Spicy, though we'll see how much that is reciprocated, or if that was just Shub kind of like foot off the gas there. And then obviously in the final round, Shub is able to help bail out Alex by just bidding 5,000 again. So not anything that was like particularly impressive from Shub in this episode, but good relationships across the board. We are going to see a pretty big drop from the first place kind of average of all of the voters there, now down to third place, but still a respectable position at the top of the rankings. And rounding out the top of those rankings, we have Spicy, who you can see has a pretty commanding position for third place here. This is the second most agreed upon position, and Spicy also has the second highest amount of second place votes there. So a pretty big jump up for Spicy as well. This is the third biggest increase, or actually fourth biggest increase. There's a few other bigger increases in the cast, but still a really commanding position. Spicy has now shown that he's willing to take charge, he's willing to lead, and also willing to win. And not only willing to win, but knows the strategies that have to get acted on in order to win. And I think in terms of how this episode plays out, we do see some really interesting tactics from Joey, who we're going to talk about in just a second, in terms of how Joey is able to take advantage of Ben and point Ben in the direction where he needs to go to stay away from Joey, which certainly helps contribute to Joey, Spicy, and Kathy's win. But more so, we see Spicy being the one to actually act on the play. And the other thing that we see that is really powerful from Spicy here is a win at the cost of his own points. Spicy being willing to feed someone else the win, which is obviously a really powerful strategy in Gambit game, because it allows you to extend your power beyond just your own score. So he was able to have a comfortable enough position. Now, I brought this up a lot in the episode before this point, but I do think that Spicy sacrifices something this episode. He just stays in a room with Kathy the entire time, with brief visits from Joey and Shub, and that's going to lessen his control on some of the other players in the game. So we'll see how that is going to impact him ultimately, or if he will be able to lead larger groups when the games call for it. But top of the leaderboard for episode 2 is no surprise. It is Joey by a country mile. Joey getting over half of the votes in this poll. There was about 30-something people that voted, and Joey got 17 votes for first place. Pretty impressive. He also has the most votes for second place. Now, a few people have voted for Joey towards the bottom, bringing down his rating just a little bit. And those are people, again, that just feel Joey is too visible, and that can't be maintained forever. But for now, he is doing really good. He is pushing for the win, and he is somewhat, I think, actually the most interesting thing with Joey, because at every part through this game, and by game I mean episode 1 and episode 2, we see Joey somewhat making plays with the idea that he's working with other people, but ultimately every game move that he makes is self-serving. And the first time that he breaks from that is when he bids 5,000 and allows Alex and Shub to score points with him. Now, even that, it's not like Joey didn't score in that final round, and that is the interesting thing to watch out for in Joey's game that could honestly potentially justify this rating of first place, but it could also be a weakness in his game. If he is unwilling to do anything other than always make the play that is the best for himself, then he might not have the room to maneuver, like I said, with that visibility, with everybody looking at him and knowing those are the plays that he is going to go for. But you know what? One last thing. Okay, I just wanted to reorder this data really quickly to look at it based off of the ratings from this episode. So now we can see him in order. Ben obviously was eliminated. Maybe I can just get him off the screen there. I'm just going to leave it there for now. And then from there we have, if you kind of want to cut it down more or less the middle right here, everyone on this side has gone up other than Shub, and everyone on this side has gone down at least a little bit. Even Leanne and Zach, like I said, they have gone down by maintaining the same rating because other people have gone up while they have stayed the same. So yeah, here is all of the ratings. I'm just kind of talking right now just so that way this can stay on screen for another second. So let me know what you thought about both this episode recap and the rankings recap. And if you want to vote in future ratings, you can follow the subreddit r/thegenius, or follow me on Twitter or here on YouTube, and you'll be able to see my community posts. But for today, that's going to be it for me. So thank you guys very much for watching. I'm No Luck's Given. Peace.